Hey, I didn't know you could dance. We used to do those dance moves to make fun of guys when we were kids, show them how queer they were, okay?
You learned to dance like that sarcastically?
Yeah, I guess.
Welcome to some dad gaming. Your time is valuable, so let's get into it. Since people are stubborn like me, have you heard or said aim assist needs to be removed from shooting games? Mouse and keyboard players use raw input and don't need a machine to aim for us. Aiming with the mouse is a lot easier than using a controller. You get to use your whole arm while we use a small stick. Luckily, I play both inputs. But instead of telling you, I'm going to show you. This is 800 DPI on a mouse. For those who don't know, DPI means dots per inch. If we compare the mouse and how far we are moving, it will travel the crosshair on our screen the distance that is equivalent to the DPI. This is 1600. As you can see, the crosshair is moving slightly faster, and a mouse can move less of a distance to achieve the same ratio on the screen. The more distance the mouse travels, the more DPI is used on the screen. This is 3200. As we increase the DPI, for every inch the mouse is moved, the crosshair will move farther on the screen. This is how DPI works when moving a mouse. This is 4800. DPI serves as a critical metric to determine the sensitivity of a computer mouse. Let's use a PC monitor as an example. The higher the ratio, the more apps can fit on the screen. This is 6400. So for you, controller/console players, on the examples, the precision is still there. But you're basically drawing a shape on a mouse pad. And the shape may be smaller or larger, depending on the DPI. This is a DPI slowdown button, and it's truly fascinating. Most gaming mouses have this. As you can see, even at 16,000, when I press the button, it reduces the DPI to around 500. The DPI can be changed on demand in-game. This is very useful, especially for sniping or in very fast-paced close combat. And I personally believe this is how AA was intended to work, as a slowdown for the crosshair on a controller. This is just regular controller input. Now this works pretty much opposite. The less you move and hold the stick, the slower the crosshair moves. The further you move the stick, the faster the crosshair moves. But there is no on-demand slowdown. Aiming can be precise on controller, but at the cost of speed. Let's use this window as an example. Now let's try this on controller. As you can see, I'm tracing the window, and I can do this very well because I've been playing controller for over 15 years. So I'm used to it and have done this a lot. But as you can see, the stick needs to be adjusted as I trace the window frame. And instead of moving the stick, trying to make the same shape over and over, I'm holding the stick towards a direction, moving the crosshair around the window frame. But we can't reduce the ratio of the screen like on a mouse pad, because the screen would be so small, 1 inch from the crosshair to an enemy becomes a micrometer, which is literally impossible. Of course, this would take some very veteran tricks to make this easier, like flicking the stick. But this doesn't solve maintaining the crosshair completely. In order to win a gunfight, the stick is being moved by the millimeter and by the millisecond. This can be very difficult, even for a controller player much better than myself. But a controller player pretty much has to move and hold a small lever, basically measuring the time and how far the stick is being pushed. Think of it like this: trying to instantly correct the crosshair when over aiming, and being 1 inch away from an enemy on the screen. When over aiming a target, to make an exact calculated move within the millisecond, trying to win the TTK from 200 milliseconds to 800 milliseconds, depending on the game. Now we have less than a second to correct our crosshair. Mouse and keyboard players would simply have to move the mouse the same ratio distance on the pad based on the DPI input, or if the DPI slowdown button is being pressed. The same distance we travel the mouse on the mouse pad will be the same every time around this window, but the movement on the mouse doesn't change. This is an advantage for mouse and keyboard players. In these examples, it's much easier to correct the crosshair on the mouse and stay within the window frame. And as you can tell, it is much more difficult to stay inside the window on controller, because the reaction time and muscle memory is purely based on trying to center the enemy and mouse every single time. Because if the enemy is in the corner of our screen, they are essentially in the corner of our mouse pad. Wherever the enemy is from the crosshair is basically the same spot on the mouse pad, which as a controller player, this is not the case. While M and K can immediately know the distance that the mouse needs to travel across the pad, the stick is always center. With less than a centimeter and faster than a split second to get accurate aim. This is one of the disadvantages of raw input on controller. And this is a great exercise to help the precision on both inputs. I'm not saying you can't have good raw aim on controller, but we can't keep pretending that these inputs are similar in a competitive way and can be compared or matched skill for skill. As you can see, my sensitivity on my mouse is 3%, and my zoom, aka ADS, sensitivity is 75%. And look at how much more my sensitivity is at, 75%. My zoom, aka ADS, is 75%, to determine the same distance on where the enemy is on the screen. Now everyone is different, and may have more or less on the sensitivity. But what we need to look at is how developers support these inputs. Controller players get a lot of dev support, customizing stick dead zones, thresholds, aim assist, and input curves. This game is Battlefield 2042, and the controller support is absolutely insane, because the majority of the mouse and keyboard settings are adjusted on the PC itself. But look at mouse and keyboard. Just these things compared to all of this. So in retrospect, these two inputs are not similar at all. So we can't pretend raw aim on controller is equivalent to mouse aiming. But that just leaves more questions. If aiming is easier to learn on mouse, can any controller player aim without aim assist? What does that mean about movement on mouse and keyboard and controller? How do they utilize each other's strengths, the pros and cons, and lobbies to win gunfights? A lot of questions that we need answered. Guess we'll find out in the next video. Have a good one, my gamers.